Hi, in this video we'll talk about comparing or evaluating data and what we can have the computer do based on the result of a comparison. In addition, we'll talk about what's called libraries in the C language. Let's get started.
Before we compare data, we need to get that data. Let's declare two int variables, a and b. Note that we can declare more than one variable of the same type at once. To do so, we need to separate variable names with a comma. Now let's have our program get user input and store it in the variables we've just declared. If you don't understand what's going on here, you can refer to the previous video. What we're going to do now is we're going to compare the numbers stored in the variables a and b and have a program do different things depending on the result of comparison. Let's have a program print some text if the value of the variable a is greater than the value of the variable b. To do this, we will use an if statement.
An if statement is the word if followed by a pair of round brackets. Inside the brackets, we need to specify the condition. In our case, the condition is A is greater than B. The instructions that we want the computer to execute under the specified condition must go inside curly brackets that follow the if statement. Let's have the program output the first number is greater than the second. Now, if we run the program and input, say, 5 and 4, the program will print the text. And if we run it again and input, say, 10 and 20, the program will not print anything. This happens because we did not specify what has to happen if the first number is not greater than the second. Let's do that now. To specify what must happen if this condition isn't met, we need to add an else statement and write the instructions that will get executed inside the curly brackets that follow the word else. Note that we do not need round brackets after an else statement. Because of this, while you can have if statements without else blocks, you cannot have else blocks without an if statement. Let's have our program print the first number is smaller than the second. Now if you run the program and input, say, 1 and 2, the program will print the first number is smaller than the second. Cool. Let's run the program again, but this time we're going to input the same number twice. Let's do 5 and 5. The program prints that the first number is smaller than the second, which isn't quite true. Let's look at the code again. Here, the program checks whether the number stored in the variable a is greater than the number stored in the variable b. Since 5 is not greater than 5, the program moves to the else block and does what we told it to do in case the first number is not greater than the second. How do we fix this? We can add an else if statement to check whether the numbers are equal. An else if statement must go after the if block, but before the else block. And just like an if statement, an else if statement must have a condition to check. In our case, whether A equals B. Note that the equality operator in C and in some other programming languages consists of two equality signs, while the single equality sign is used to assign values to variables. And if these two numbers are equal, let's have our program print the numbers are equal. Let's run the program and see if it works. And it does. We have just created a program that compares two numbers and does different things depending on the result of comparison. Is there anything else we can compare? Right, we must be able to compare text as well, not just numbers. Let's see how it works in C. First, let's declare two variables that can store strings of characters and set their size to 50 characters. Let's now use the scanf function to get user input and store it in the variables s1 and s2. Let's now try to compare s1 and s2 to see if they store identical strings. If we try to do that the way we did with numbers, it's not going to work, unfortunately. To compare strings in C, we need to use a special function. The function we're going to use is strcmp, which apparently stands for string comparison. But before we actually use it, there are two concepts that we need to know. The first one is a so-called library. A library in C is a collection of functions, and if we want to use a function, we need to include in our program the library that the function belongs to. For example, the scanf function belongs to the stdio library, and we can use it because the stdio library is included in our program. If you look at the very first line of our code, you will see what's called an include directive. Inside the angle brackets is the name of the library that gets included.
If we erase this line of code, the name of the scanf function in our code will get underlined. This is because the scanf function can no longer be found. To be able to use this strcmp function to compare strings, we need to include the library the function belongs to, and the name of that library is string.h. Let's include it now. The strcmp function takes two parameters, two strings that it needs to compare. Let's call the function providing s1 and s2 as parameters. If you run the program now, Replit will throw an error saying that we are ignoring return value. So the second concept that we need to become familiar with is called return value. Functions can not only ask for some data to process in the form of parameters, but they can also output or return data in the form of return value. The strcmp function outputs or returns the result of comparison, and the error Replit threw at us happens because we do not use the result of the comparison, which in fact doesn't make much sense. Now the strcmp function returns an integer number. 0 means that the strings are identical. Anything other than 0 means that the strings are not identical. So how do we access the return value of the strcmp function? In fact, functions with a return value can be used as read-only variables. So if we want to print the return value of the strcmp function, we can pass it as a parameter to the printf function, like this. Because the strcmp function returns an integer number, we need to make respective additions to the printf function call. Now, if we run this program and input say hi and hi, the program will print 0, which means that the strings are identical. And if we run it again and input different strings, say hi and bye, the program will print something other than 0, which means that the strings are not identical. Now let's modify our program so that instead of numbers, it prints the strings are identical when the strings are identical and the strings are not identical when they're not. To do that, we need to compare the return value of the strcmp function with what? Right, with 0. Now, if we run the program and type hi and hi, the program will print that the strings are identical. And if we run it again and type hi and bye, the program will print the strings are not identical.
In this video, we'll learn how to use conditional statements to compare data and perform different operations based on the result of comparison. We also learned that functions in C belong to libraries, and to use a function, we need to include the respective library in our program. Finally, functions can have a return value that we can use as a read-only variable. In this video, we only used two comparison operators, greater than and equals. In addition to those, there are less than, greater or equals, less or equals, not equal operators. This is it for this video. In the next one, we will learn how to make computers repeat the same set of instructions multiple times. Stay tuned. Bye.